Rain had begun to blur the edges of the road, turning the asphalt into a slick mirror that reflected the gray sky above. I noticed him before anyone else did, a young German shepherd trudging along the shoulder, his ribs faintly visible under his soaked fur, eyes fixed on our car with a gaze that carried exhaustion, mistrust, and something unbearably human. He moved as if the wind itself had stolen his strength, each step hesitant, dragging yet relentless. My chest tightened, a prickle of guilt slicing through the hum of the engine. How long had he been alone? How many nights had he spent shivering under broken trees, chewing on whatever scraps luck threw his way? The rain spattered against the windshield, and he flinched at each drop, ears flattened, tail low, a silent surrender written in the slump of his shoulders. I pressed my hand to the glass as if that small barrier could reach him, and for a moment he paused, head tilting slightly, like he'd registered a heartbeat of empathy in a world that had ignored him for too long. And then he started following again, slow, methodical, carrying a weight that neither hunger nor fear could fully explain, a young soul teetering between hope and resignation, choosing somehow to keep going. The rain had started in soft, hesitant taps, the kind that made everything smell like wet earth and cold metal, and then it grew insistent, hammering on the windshield, blurring the street lights into long, trembling streaks. I noticed him the moment the orange glow of the traffic light flickered across the road, a figure moving along the shoulder, slow and deliberate, almost spectral against the gray wash of asphalt. At first I thought it was a trick of the rain, a shadow that had wandered into my peripheral vision. But then he lifted his head, eyes dark, wet, glimmering with the kind of hollow despair that felt too human for a dog. A young German shepherd, ribs faintly visible, fur matted with rain and grime, trudging along with the patience of someone who had given up counting the days he'd been alone. My chest tightened, a subtle but relentless squeeze, and I realized I was holding my breath without knowing it. The car hummed beneath us, tires slicing through puddles, but he didn't flinch away. He didn't dart, didn't run. He just kept walking, following, one slow, measured step at a time, as if tethered to some invisible string connecting him to us. There was a rhythm to it that made my heart ache. The weight of every step dragging over the slick road, claws clicking faintly against asphalt, had low ears flattened like he had learned to disappear into the shadows. I could feel the guilt spreading, thick and sticky, like the rain soaking through my jacket. How long had he been out here? How many nights had he shivered beneath broken roofs, beneath the skeletal trees that offered nothing but wet shade? I imagined him curled up under a dumpster, nose tucked into paws, listening to the world pass him by, the smell of trash and mud mixing with the cold taste of rainwater on his tongue. I tried to catch his eye, pressing my hand to the glass of the passenger window, as if that small, fragile barrier could offer some reassurance. For a moment, he paused. Head tilted slightly, one ear flicking in that twitch that all German shepherds have when they sense danger or something unfamiliar. But it wasn't fear I saw in his gaze. It was calculation, exhaustion, and a hint of something that almost felt like hope. And then he resumed, slow and deliberate, not running, not crying out, just following as though his legs remembered how to move, even when his spirit threatened to crumble. The rain intensified, hammering against the roof in irregular rhythms. I noticed the little details then, the things that always seem invisible until you're staring at suffering. A patch of fur missing above his shoulder, a gash on the left side of his muzzle crusted over with dried blood and dirt, and the faint tremor that ran through his body as the wind blew a particularly sharp gust across the open road. He was too young to be carrying this much weight. He should have been running in a field, chasing sticks, learning the world through joy rather than survival. The image stabbed me with a raw, visceral pain I could not name. My companion in the driver's seat spoke softly, almost whispering to the wind, words I could barely catch. "Do we stop?" My throat tight. Every instinct screamed caution. Stray dogs can be unpredictable, sick, or scared. But every other instinct, a slower, deeper one, screamed mercy. He was following us, yes, but there was no aggression in him. There was no fight left, no defense, just persistence and loneliness. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, how his tail hung low enough to brush the wet asphalt, how he occasionally glanced over his shoulder at the fields beyond, as though weighing whether to leave the path or continue. measuring the distance between fear and trust. I felt myself leaning closer to the window, hands pressed against the cold glass, heart hammering like it might break through my ribs. The air smelled of wet earth and rain-soaked grass, faintly metallic from the storm runoff pooling along the edges of the road. I wondered if he smelled the same world differently. If every raindrop, every puddle was a challenge, a hazard, a reminder that he was alone. Minutes stretched into a suspended eternity. The car slowed involuntarily. Neither of us said a word, but the weight of the unspoken agreement hung between us like smoke. I tried to gauge his pace, to see if he was strong enough to keep up, but the drizzle plastered his fur to his skin, made him seem smaller, more fragile than any mental picture I had ever imagined. Every so often, he would pause mid-step, lift his head, and his gaze would meet mine again. It was deliberate, intelligent searching. There was a kind of quiet desperation in that look, as though he were saying without words, "I don't know how much longer I can do this, but I'll try for you. I'll try for whoever will care." The rain came harder, cold against our windows, blurring the world into a gray, wet watercolor. Streetlights flickered, neon signs hummed in the distance, but the road around us had grown quiet, empty, as if the storm had chased everything else inside. And in that stillness, he kept walking. He kept following. Each step made a soft splash in the accumulating puddles. Each movement whispered a story I didn't fully understand yet, a story of hunger, fear, endurance, and the faint flickering spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally notice. My mind raced. I imagined him curled under a bridge that night, shivering, alone, the scent of damp leaves and rusted metal wrapping around him like a blanket he hadn't earned. I imagined his belly pressed against the cold, wet ground, his paws raw from endless walking. And then I thought of us, moving in a car, warm and dry, shields against the storm that had claimed him. The unfairness of it made my stomach twist. I could see my hands gripping the wheel tighter, knuckles white, nails digging into my palms. Something inside me refused to look away. Something inside me refused to let him walk alone any longer. It was then, in the middle of that gray, rain-slicked road, that I realized the story wasn't about a dog following a car. It was about survival, resilience, and the quiet plea that rises from a heart long abandoned. He had given up in all the ways that mattered: hope, energy, trust. But he had not stopped moving. He had not surrendered fully. And somehow, in that small, slow, deliberate act of following us, he had reached out across the distance of our separate lives, demanding that someone see him. I swallowed hard, the taste of rain and guilt mixing on my tongue, and whispered under my breath, "We see you," and I meant it. For the first time since I saw him, I imagined a future where he might be safe, warm, fed, loved. A future where his slow, resigned steps could become a trot, a run, a leap into the kind of life he had deserved from the start. The rain continued to fall, heavy now, relentless, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a curtain, shielding the moment, framing it in a way that made the impossible feel possible. And then, almost imperceptibly, he picked up his pace. Not running, not leaping, but moving with a faint spark of momentum. A tiny acknowledgement that the first step toward change had been made, that we had noticed him, that perhaps he was no longer entirely alone. And in that moment, I knew we could not let this end here. Not in the rain, not on this road. Not after he had trusted us with the weight of his slow, exhausted journey. The car slowed to a crawl, tires hissing in the shallow puddles, as if the world itself had held its breath. The young German shepherd paused, head cocked, his body rigid with caution, yet his dark, haunted eyes never left ours. Rain streaked down the windshield, distorting the reflection of his face until it became something more. A ghost, a memory, a plea that clung to the edges of perception. My fingers lingered over the window lock, heart thudding with that strange mixture of fear and compulsion that rises when one realizes intervention is no longer optional but urgent. He had chosen to follow us this far, and yet, whether he would let us approach remained a question written in every tremble of his lean frame. I opened the door slowly, the cold air and rain washing over me in a wet, biting shock. The scent of wet fur, mud, and something sharper, perhaps fear, rose in a tangible wave curling around my senses. He flinched, ears flattening, tail tucked low, and for a second I thought he might bolt into the gray blur of the rain-soaked road. but he did. He only shifted his weight, paws skimming the asphalt, and took a small, hesitant step toward the curb. I exhaled, a shaky sound that mingled with the patter of rain, and crouched, one hand extended as gently as possible. My voice broke across the distance, low and tentative. "Hey, it's okay. We won't hurt you." The words hung in the misted air, fragile as a whispered promise, yet they seemed to reach him. His body relaxed ever so slightly, and his nose twitched, inhaling cautiously, testing the intent behind the human voice. I could see the tension in his muscles, the subtle contraction of his jaw as he assessed the risk of this approach. Every instinct screamed caution, and yet there was an unspoken calculation in his gaze. Hunger, fear, and a desperate longing for safety all blended together, weaving a fragile thread of trust that had survived so many nights alone. I moved closer, rain dripping from my hood, mud squelching beneath my boots, each step deliberate and slow, aware that any sudden movement could shatter the fragile truce forming between us. His ears flicked, and his tail twitched, a tiny, indecisive movement that suggested curiosity peeking through exhaustion. I knelt fully now, chest level with his, trying to make myself smaller, less threatening. The wind whipped at the edges of my jacket, carrying the scent of wet grass and rain-soaked asphalt, and he flinched again, then froze, frozen not with fear but with indecision. It took minutes for him to move forward, paw by cautious paw, the soft squish of mud marking each tentative advance. I could see the muscles in his shoulders ripple under his soaked fur, lean and taut, and I imagined the night spent scavenging for scraps, the harsh cold pressed into his bones, the gnawing hunger that had sharpened every step. And yet here he was, walking toward a human, toward a warmth he had never truly known. The weight of it hit me like a tidal wave, a mix of awe and heartbreak so raw I had to swallow it down to keep my hands from shaking. My companion knelt on the other side, murmuring reassurances, coaxing with gentle rhythmic words. The shepherd's nose twitched, then lowered, sniffing at our boots, our hands, our scent, trying to decode this unfamiliar offering. I saw his eyes flicker with memory, a shadow of betrayal and fear, before settling, just slightly, on a spark of curiosity and hope. One paw lifted, then the other, the rhythm halting, faltering, as if he had not walked this path before, not with trust, not with certainty. I reached out, palm open, allowing him to choose, to step into the bridge of our presence on his own terms. He inched closer, wet fur brushing against my sleeve, and I could feel the tremor of his body against my own, a trembling that spoke of both fear and relief. The rain fell harder now, but neither of us noticed. The sound became a backdrop, a drumbeat to this fragile ritual of acceptance. Each breath I took mingled with the damp air, and I could feel his shallow, rapid inhalations, the faint shiver rolling down his spine. And then, almost imperceptibly, he sniffed my hand, tentative, testing, weighing its intentions. The moment stretched, delicate and fragile, a wire stretched between two worlds, one of fear and abandonment, the other of warmth and protection. I whispered his name aloud, a sound I hadn't even decided on before, and the shepherd's ears twitched. A soft whine escaped him, not of complaint but of acknowledgement, and I could feel the tiniest shift, the first breach in the walls he had built around himself over months, perhaps years of neglect. He took another step, closer this time, until my fingertips brushed the fur along his neck. Wet, cold, but alive, trembling with every heartbeat. I spoke again, softer now. "It's okay. You're safe." The words carried over the rain, into his fur, into the tremor of his muscles, into the cautious flicker of trust in his eyes. He lowered his head slightly, a hesitant acceptance of the touch, and in that instant the world outside, the rain, the cold, the gray stretch of road, faded to a blurred backdrop. It was just him, and it was just us, and it was enough. We waited there, crouched in the rain, the shepherd lingering on the threshold between fear and safety. His tail twitched once, a motion so slight I almost missed it, but it was a victory, a signal that he was beginning to understand he did not need to run, did not need to fight. He could stay. He could exist in a space of gentleness for the first time in who knows how long. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, rainwater blending with them, and I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to remain steady for him. Finally, we offered him the first tentative gift, a small scrap of bread we had in the car, wet and soggy from the rain but edible. He sniffed it cautiously, nose wriggling, before taking it with the utmost care, as if accepting sustenance from humans was a delicate contract, one that required trust and negotiation. I held my breath as he chewed, ears flicking, eyes wary, body taut. He didn't flee. He stayed. He was choosing us, even if only for this one small, tremulous moment. I whispered encouragements, letting him hear the warmth in my voice, the commitment behind it, and he lifted his gaze again. Eyes dark, wet, intelligent, tired, but not defeated, not entirely. A spark of something resilient flickered there, like a candle in a storm, fragile yet persistent. And in that moment, crouched in the rain, surrounded by mud and wet asphalt, I realized we had crossed a threshold together, the invisible line between despair and possibility. He had chosen to trust, and we had chosen to honor that trust. The road behind him was long, filled with nights of hunger and fear, but the road ahead, though uncertain, was ours to walk together. And so he followed, slowly at first, each step measured, tentative, until eventually he matched our pace. He matched our pace. A bridge had been built, not just of hand and paw, but of recognition, of empathy, of the shared understanding that one moment could change everything. Rain poured, cold and unrelenting, but we were warm in the center of that fragile bond. I had no idea what the next steps would bring, but for the first time I knew he would not be alone. The first night was a fragile, trembling thing. The young German shepherd curled in the corner of the garage, tail tucked, eyes wide and unblinking, staring at shadows as if they might bite. Rain still drummed against the roof, but inside the world smelled different. This dry wood, faint oil from the garage tools, and a hint of the human's lingering warmth. I knelt near him, careful to keep my movements slow, gentle, as though any sudden gesture could undo the fragile trust we had begun to build on the rain-slick road. He flinched at every creak, every distant rumble, ears flattening and muscles coiling with instinctive defense. I swallowed the lump in my throat and spoke softly, my voice low and even. "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." The way he studied me was telling. Each tilt of his head, each subtle twitch of his ear, every cautious sniff seemed to measure my intentions. I could see the scars on his body more clearly now. A jagged line along his flank, faint scratches along his muzzle, fur patchy in places where fleas had long ago bitten their mark. These were not just physical wounds. They were memories written on skin and muscle, invisible yet screaming in the way he held himself, braced and wary. My heart ached for him, a mix of empathy and helplessness. How had he survived this long? How had he endured nights colder than the rain, days hungrier than hunger itself? I offered food again, laying it gently a few feet away. He sniffed, inching closer, eyes darting between the sustenance and the humans. He did not rush. He did not attack. He was cautious, haunted, burdened with an invisible ledger of past betrayals. The first bite was hesitant, tentative, almost ceremonial, and as he chewed, I noticed his muscles relax in the tiniest increments, a subtle surrender that carried with it the weight of untold nights of deprivation. The sound of rain tapping on the tin roof became less oppressive, more like a lullaby, and I realized he was beginning to believe, even if just slightly, that the world might not always be a place of fear, but fragments of fear lingered everywhere. A door slammed in the distance, a flashlight beam swept across the yard, a car horn honked from the street. Each stimulus sent a jolt through his body, tail snapping down, ears flattening, eyes wide and watchful. I watched in mirrored patience, speaking softly, kneeling low, letting him dictate the pace. He circled me once, twice, sniffed my boots, my hands, my jacket, testing, assessing. I imagined the nights he had spent dodging humans, the cold he had endured, the hunger gnawing at every inch of his small body. Trust was a delicate currency he had never been able to afford, and even now, it was being spent sparingly with care. The night stretched long. I could hear the faint rumble of distant traffic, the occasional drip of water from the eaves, and the rhythmic sound of his cautious breathing. It was uneven at first, shallow, quick, alert, but gradually it slowed, became more consistent, a sign that he was beginning to process the presence of safety. I stayed with him, letting the warmth of my body and voice mingle with the damp air, a tether that reminded him he was no longer alone. Occasionally, he would glance toward the open garage door, towards the outside world, as though assessing the balance between freedom and security. I noticed small behaviors, the silent language of trauma. He flinched at sudden movements, hesitated before approaching objects, avoided direct eye contact, and lowered his head in the presence of hands that reached too quickly. Every step forward was measured, every interaction a negotiation between fear and the faint stirrings of trust. I realized the rescue had only begun. The first physical contact on the road had been a bridge, yes, but the emotional repair, healing the fractures of abandonment, would take patience measured in hours, days, maybe weeks. As the hours passed, I began to see glimmers of his personality emerge. He stretched carefully, testing the boundaries of the garage, tail twitching, ears flicking with curiosity rather than pure fear. When I spoke his name softly, he would lift his head slightly, nostrils flaring, acknowledging my voice without fully surrendering. His eyes, dark and wet, began to carry a faint glimmer, a subtle spark of recognition that this was a world that might be gentler than the one he had known. And though he flinched at shadows and sounds, he no longer tried to flee. That, I knew, was a victory. The night deepened. Rain eased into a soft drizzle, and the garage settled into a quiet rhythm, punctuated by the occasional creak of wood and the distant hum of the neighborhood. I sat back on the cold floor, knees pulled to my chest, watching him rest on the edge of the straw bedding we had set out. Each shallow breath, each subtle twitch of muscle told a story of survival and lingering fear. I thought about the weeks, maybe months, of abandonment, the cold nights, the constant search for food, the human encounters that had left him wary, scarred. And I marveled at his resilience, how he had survived, how he had chosen to follow us when he could have continued alone. I spoke quietly, narrating small reassurances, letting him hear the warmth behind my words. "You don't have to hide anymore," I whispered. "You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to trust." He lifted his head slightly, sniffed the air, then lowered it again, still cautious, still measuring, still carrying the weight of memory like armor over his lean body. But for the first time, I sensed a subtle shift, a fragment of fear replaced with curiosity, fragments of hesitation replaced with cautious exploration. Hours passed in this delicate dance. I watched him explore the small, safe corners of the garage, sniffing, stepping, retreating, returning. Each movement was a negotiation, each glance a test, and I understood then that healing was not linear. It was fragile, punctuated with setbacks, moments of fear, moments of uncertainty. Yet in the quiet interplay of our shared presence, I could feel the first true seeds of trust beginning to root themselves in this young German shepherd's wary heart. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The storm left the air crisp and cold, the sky tinged with pale light that hinted at possibility. He lay curled in the straw, eyes half closed, but now his breathing was steady, measured, less a reflection of fear and more of calm. And in that moment, I knew we had crossed another threshold, not the physical threshold of the road, but the emotional threshold of trust. Fragments of fear remained, but there were glimmers of hope now, sparks that promised the slow, fragile rebuilding of a life nearly extinguished. I sat beside him quietly, letting the light wash over the damp, matted fur, thinking about the journey ahead. The road from fear to safety, from abandonment to trust, would be long, uncertain, and filled with invisible battles, but for the first time he had chosen to walk that road with us. And for the first time I realized that I had chosen it for him too. In the pale, early light, he lifted his head and looked at me, eyes dark, cautious, and glimmering with a spark that had survived the storm. And in that gaze I understood. The fragments of fear were still there, but they were beginning to assemble into something new, something stronger. He was beginning to believe, in his own careful way, that there could be safety, warmth, and even love. The journey had just begun, but the first step had been taken. And in that step, hope was born. Morning had come slowly, hesitant light spilling through the half-open garage door, casting long, pale stripes across the wet floor. The young German shepherd, once rigid with fear, now moved with a tentative grace, sniffing the edges of the space as if testing boundaries he had not dared to approach before. His tail, once tucked and invisible, flicked subtly with each cautious step, a quiet testament to the fragile trust growing between us. I knelt on the concrete floor, leaning forward, letting him decide how close he would come, speaking softly, as though my words themselves were a bridge, spanning the divide between his fractured past and this new, uncertain present. The storm had left the world outside shimmering, streets wet and glinting, leaves dripping with water that smelled like promise and renewal. I could see the first signs of his curiosity emerge. He approached objects and corners he had previously avoided, nose twitching, ears pricked, body still tense but no longer frozen. Every sniff, every small step forward, was a negotiation, a test of safety. I watched as he nudged a damp shoelace with his nose, circled the pile of straw bedding, and finally settled near the edge where sunlight warmed the floor. In that moment, I understood the delicate balance of healing. Trust was not given. It was earned, cultivated in the slow accumulation of tiny victories, gestures of patience, and the unspoken assurance that he would no longer be left to fend for himself. We moved cautiously through the morning, careful to maintain rhythm without imposing. My companion stepped outside briefly to check the yard, leaving the garage door open, and the shepherd's eyes followed every motion, calculating, considering. When the human returned, he approached more confidently, ears flicking forward, tail beginning to lift in a subtle, hesitant curve. Each encounter was layered: curiosity, uncertainty, and a spark of recognition that safety was not a fleeting illusion. I felt my own chest swell with cautious relief. The bridge we were building was visible now, stretching over the chasm of fear, anchored by moments of connection, small acts of kindness, and shared presence. By late morning, we ventured outside. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of rain-washed grass and the faint tang of puddles. I watched him move over the uneven ground, cautious but deliberate, eyes scanning the environment, tail occasionally flicking with a hesitant rhythm. He paused at the edge of a muddy patch, paw lifted mid-step, then pressed forward when I crouched low and gestured gently, reinforcing the unspoken lesson. This world, with all its sounds and smells and sudden movements, could be navigated without fear. He began to follow more readily now, keeping a short distance but responding to voice and gesture. A playful breeze lifted the fur along his neck, and I noticed him shake it off, a subtle expression of relief, as if shedding the invisible weight of the nights spent alone. I realized then that he was learning to trust not just humans, but the environment itself. A world that had once seemed hostile and unyielding was now a place where curiosity could outpace fear. Each step forward was more confident, more intentional, and in those small motions, the arc of transformation became undeniable. Lunch was a small ritual. We offered him morsels of cooked meat, placing them gently on the ground, observing his cautious approach. He sniffed, paused, then took the food with careful, deliberate movements, glancing toward us as if ensuring the world had not changed again. The way he ate, slow and measured, spoke of lingering habits of scarcity and survival, yet with each bite his body relaxed further, spine lengthening, tail lifting slightly. We murmured encouragement, our voices soft, rhythmic, a soundtrack of patience and reassurance. And in response, he began to wag in small, careful bursts, a gesture so subtle that it almost went unnoticed, yet monumental in the quiet revolution of trust unfolding before our eyes. The afternoon brought challenges. A loud truck rumbled down the street, tires splashing through puddles, and he froze, muscles coiled like springs. I approached slowly, hands visible, voice calm, and he hesitated, then followed my steps as I circled around him, allowing him to witness safety in action. Each challenge became a test of the bridge we were building. Would he retreat, or would he step forward, buoyed by the promise of care and presence? Time and again, he chose the latter. His confidence grew in increments, subtle as the first green shoots of spring, but undeniable in their persistence. By evening, the bond had deepened noticeably. He followed our movements more closely, responding to names, soft whistles, and gentle claps. Eyes that once reflected only calculation and fear now showed flickers of curiosity and recognition. He nudged a hand, sniffed a sleeve without recoiling, and allowed gentle scratches along the shoulder, leaning subtly into touch. The bridge was no longer theoretical. It was alive, tangible, woven from acts of patience, trust, and shared vulnerability. The rain-soaked road behind us felt like a distant memory, the darkness of abandonment receding with each deliberate, confident step. We ventured further into the yard, testing boundaries and freedom in small doses. Puddles were approached with caution but explored, grass sniffed, mud pawed. He had learned, slowly but clearly, that exploration need not equal danger. Every movement was an exercise in courage, every pause a reflection of the still present shadows of past trauma. And yet each tiny success reinforced the fragile architecture of trust, the shared rhythm of heartbeats between human and dog, the quiet acknowledgement that life could offer warmth, safety, and belonging. As twilight approached, the light softened to a golden hue, glinting on wet fur and the slick surfaces of puddles. He lay at our feet for the first time without flinching. Ears relaxed, body stretched, eyes half closed but alert. The storm that had begun as a barrier now seemed like a cleanser, washing away remnants of fear, leaving only the tentative outlines of hope. I whispered, barely above a breath, "We'll keep you safe. Always." His gaze met mine, dark and intelligent, and I understood that the connection was no longer fragile. It had matured into a living, breathing bridge between hearts, one that neither time nor fear could easily undo. Night settled softly over the house, the first stars pricking the sky through the receding clouds. He lay in the straw, breathing steady, tail flicking occasionally, muscles relaxed yet coiled with the quiet alertness of a creature learning to live again. We sat nearby, silent, letting the shared presence speak volumes. In the stillness, I realized that the bridge we had built was not merely a path from fear to safety. It was a mutual transformation, a lesson in patience, empathy, and the resilience of trust. The young German shepherd had followed us that first rainy night like a shadow, hesitant and fragile, carrying the weight of fear, abandonment, and survival. Now, he walked beside us, ears pricked, tail lifted, body taut but confident, navigating the world with cautious curiosity and the beginning of joy. The bridge between hearts had formed, spanning the chasm of trauma, a tangible, living testament to connection, care, and the quiet power of compassion. And as I watched him lie down at our feet, finally relaxed, eyes half closed in contentment, I felt a profound, unspoken truth settle over me. He had not just found safety, he had found us, and in doing so, we had found each other. The sky was a bruised canvas of gray and violet when we finally stepped outside together, the young German shepherd at our heels, ears flicking, tail tentatively wagging. Rain had returned, softer this time, a drizzle that misted the air and left the world glimmering in wet reflections. The streets shimmered under the faint streetlights, puddles reflecting the muted orange glow as if the city itself were holding its breath for this quiet, fragile coming. He paused at the edge of the sidewalk, head tilted, muscles coiled for flight, and I knelt, extending a hand, letting him choose the step forward. For the first time, he didn't hesitate. He came to me slowly, deliberately, eyes gleaming with something that almost felt like pride, or recognition, or gratitude. Perhaps all three. The drive home was quiet, a soft hum of tires over wet asphalt, punctuated only by the occasional whisper of encouragement. He rested his head on the edge of the seat, ears flicking at every sound but body relaxed, tail brushing the floor in a tentative rhythm. I glanced at him and caught the faint glimmer of trust, still cautious, but undeniable. Months, or maybe years, of survival had been etched into his lean frame, in scars and calluses and wary eyes and taut muscles, yet here he was, letting himself be carried, letting himself be safe, letting himself be cared for. The reality of it struck me with a weight I could feel in my chest. This fragile creature, so long abandoned, had chosen to accept love, and in doing so, had changed both our lives. When we arrived, the garage door lifted with a creak, revealing the soft glow of home. The warmth hit him immediately, a tangible wall against the rain and chill outside. He hesitated at the threshold for a heartbeat, sniffing the air, gauging, measuring, then stepped forward. Each paw was careful, almost ceremonial, as though entering this space required negotiation and courage. And then he paused, turned, and looked back at us. His eyes, dark and wet, seemed to hold a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding. We were in this together now, all of us, and there was no going back. Inside, the house smelled of warmth, food, and human habitation, a scent both foreign and comforting to him. He explored cautiously at first, sniffing corners, nudging furniture, ears flicking, muscles tense but gradually softening. His tail lifted slightly with each small discovery, and I could see the wonder in the careful way he tested the boundaries of this new world. The sounds of the house, the faint hum of appliances, the distant creak of the stairs, the whisper of rain against the windows, became background rather than threat. He was learning that life could be navigated without constant vigilance, that safety could exist, tangible and present, in the company of those who had chosen to care. Night fell softly, shadows pooling in corners, but he no longer trembled at them. He lay on the bedding we had prepared, fur damp but gradually warming, ears relaxed, tail flicking in a slow rhythm. I knelt beside him, hand brushing through his damp fur, feeling the tension leave his lean body, watching his breathing deepen into something calm, measured. The faint scars and missing patches of fur told stories of nights shivering, of hunger gnawing, of humans who had failed him. But here, under this roof, they were memories rather than present realities. Here he could rest. Here he could heal. As the rain whispered against the windows, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here.